She fired me in front of 30 people, right after the champagne toast. Said I was just an admin, a line item the new budget couldn't justify. Everyone laughed. I stood there with my plastic flute of sparkling rosé, heart pounding in my ears, as if I hadn't single-handedly kept the company's $300 million credit line alive for the past 6 years. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share. Your support keeps the stories coming. Curtis Daniels, the new VP of Strategic Finance, had been at Mero & Koja for 6 weeks. Fancy teeth, perfect suits, MBA from somewhere he never shut up about. He'd shown up with noise, new policies, long meetings, vague Excel dashboards that said nothing but got everyone nodding like it was scripture. What he didn't show up with was respect. He called me sunshine once. I didn't correct him. I just filed it away with every email he CC'd me on about non-essential roles and fat trimming. I knew what was coming, but even knowing, nothing prepares you for the cold precision of a public execution, especially not at the year-end party, under a string of fairy lights, while holding your slice of cake. "You've been wonderful," he said, like I was a pet. He was rehoming. "But this is a different phase of growth. We're tightening the belt. Best of luck, Selena." The music never even stopped. I smiled, nodded once, and placed my untouched cake on the bar. No one met my eyes. They were already back to networking, pitching ideas, handing out fake compliments like hors d'oeuvres. Not a single soul knew what I really did for that company. They thought compliance was forms and filing. They didn't know I'd been the named officer of record for all regulatory documentation on our revolving credit line. They didn't know that, without me, the bank wouldn't even know who to talk to. I walked out without saying a word. No tears, no scene. I went back to my desk on Monday, as required by HR, to collect my personal items. No one came by, not even Jill from payroll, who I'd helped cover a $40,000 processing error for last spring. It was like I'd already vanished. I logged out, not just of the system, but of everything. I revoked my credentials from the compliance portal, flagged my own email for deletion, and removed my name from the access records for First Mercantile Bank. Legally, I had to be the one to do it. The final act, I left a single post-it note on my monitor. Access revoked by admin. No transition assigned. Then I walked out and turned off my phone. The silence was divine. By Tuesday morning, I had 3 missed calls from Cliff, the CFO. Wednesday came with 9 more, plus a text that just said, "Please call, urgent." I didn't. I was halfway through a bottle of Syrah and watching snow fall from my new Airbnb loft, a quiet place near Lake Michigan. I'd booked the same night I left the office. Thursday morning, my inbox was full again. Emails from names that had never acknowledged me before. One from Curtis himself. Subject line, "Immediate assistance needed. Apparently the bank had locked their credit line. Frozen. No disbursements, no renewals, no vendor payments. Why? Because they had no named compliance officer. I was the only authorized contact. No one knew the renewal timeline but me. No one had the passwords, the security questions, the monthly regulatory filings, or the digital tokens to prove standing. Payroll was due Friday. By noon, I had a voicemail from Cliff. He sounded like a man being dragged underwater. "Selena, we didn't understand the scope of your role. If there's any way we can bring you back temporarily, under a consulting contract, we're open to your terms. Please, we're in trouble." I finished my glass and listened to it again. Then I called back. I told them I'd return for $25,000 a day, prepaid, minimum 5 days. He stammered, said he'd run it by Curtis. I said, "You do that," and ended the call. Then I poured myself another glass and turned on the fire. The next morning, the credit line was gone. First Mercantile sent a termination notice, non-compliance breach. The CFO called me again. This time his voice shook. Curtis didn't speak. I imagined him sitting there, watching the building collapse from a chair he thought he owned. I didn't say yes, because by then, I had another offer. A private firm I'd quietly interviewed with last year had seen the implosion and reached out. They'd always said I was overqualified for admin. Now they were offering me the title I deserved. But first, I had one last stop to make, and it was going to sting. I didn't need to go back, but I wanted to. Not for revenge, something colder than that. I wanted to see it, the aftermath, the mess they'd made, to walk through the ruins like a ghost they thought they buried. Mero & Coa was holding a quarterly Investor Confidence Day, an invite-only event for shareholders and select press, a half-day of projections, promises, and polished smiles. They were still trying to project stability, hoping the news of the frozen credit line wouldn't reach the wrong ears. But rumors were already bleeding through. A few vendors had gone public on LinkedIn, hinting at payment irregularities. Staff morale was sinking fast. I'd heard from a friend in HR that over a dozen key employees had quietly started interviewing elsewhere. Curtis was still there. That surprised me. I thought he'd be the first to fall. But men like him always survive the first wave. They bluff. They redirect. They pretend they had a plan. That's why I went. I didn't have a badge anymore, but I didn't need one. The building still buzzed with the same security team, and the front desk recognized me. Nobody questions confidence, especially not when you're dressed like power. A deep navy pantsuit, hair pulled back, nothing flashy, but not forgettable. The kind of look that says, you don't know who I work for, but it's probably above your pay grade. I walked straight in. The event was held on the 12th floor, the executive conference space with the skyline view, glass walls, curated floral arrangements, coffee stations staffed by baristas. Investors wore the usual soft smiles, asking hard questions politely. I stood in the back near the glass, watching like a ghost in plain sight. They didn't see me at first. Curtis stood at the front with his perfect grin, pointing at charts that meant nothing, projections, forecasts, all fiction, the kind of corporate optimism you can only stomach if you're holding stock options. Then his eyes shifted. Just for a second, he saw me, and everything in his face cracked. It was small, just a flicker, enough that anyone watching closely would have seen it. The way his hand hesitated, the way his smile faltered before he recovered. He knew I wasn't there by accident. A woman near me leaned over. "Are you part of audit?" she whispered, glancing at my badgeless blazer. "Something like that," I said. Curtis rushed through the rest of the presentation, like he was trying to outrun his own shadow. As soon as he wrapped up, he made a beeline for the side hallway, not even waiting for applause. I waited 10 seconds, then followed. He was by the elevators, tapping furiously at his phone when I stepped in behind him. "Don't," I said, voice calm. He turned, sweating. "Selena, what are you doing here?" "Watching," I said. "It's fascinating, really, watching someone try to build a bridge from dust." He looked around, making sure no one was listening. "You have no right." "You fired me," I said. "You made that very clear, but you didn't read my file. You didn't know I was the only one who could speak to the bank. You didn't even ask." His jaw tightened. "We were restructuring. You were in a support role." "No," I said. I was the spine. He didn't respond, just swallowed hard, then quieter. "Look, I made a mistake. A lot of people did. But this isn't helping. You've made your point." "Oh, I haven't made it yet," I said, stepping closer. "But I'm about to." He flinched. "What does that mean?" "You'll see." I smiled. In about 7 minutes, that was the moment his phone buzzed. He looked down, and I could see the panic bloom in his eyes like wildfire. Then I walked away, because 7 minutes from that exact moment, the press embargo would lift, and the expose I'd helped leak, anonymously, strategically, and with precise supporting documents, would go live across 3 major financial outlets. The headline was simple: 311th credit line pulled. Marrow and Chackham under regulatory scrutiny. Subheading: Key compliance resignation triggers. Financial chain reaction. VP under fire. Every detail was accurate. I hadn't added spin. I didn't need to. The truth, when served cold and well-timed, was enough to bury giants. By the time I got back to the lobby, the first phones were buzzing, investors stepping out with furrowed brows, assistants pulling up Bloomberg on their tablets. Panic, like a slow gas leak, filling the floor. Outside, I slipped into my car, where I had a private Zoom link waiting. It was with my new employer, Eastridge Capital Partners. They were onboarding me as their Director of Global Compliance, starting salary well over double what I'd made at Marrow. The interviewer smiled. "You look satisfied." "I'm in the right job for the first time in years," I said. He paused. "We've been watching you for a while. The work you did at Marrow, keeping everything airtight, that wasn't invisible to everyone." "I wasn't trying to be seen," I said, "just not ignored." "Fair enough," he said. "Welcome aboard." I ended the call, leaned back in my seat, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since I walked out of that building. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because there was one more person who needed to know the truth. Not Curtis. Not Cliff. My father. The man who once told me, at a Thanksgiving dinner full of lawyers and consultants and tech millionaires, that I should have aimed higher than office admin. "You're smart enough to do real work. Selena," he'd said, carving turkey like a judge handing out life sentences. "I don't know why you waste yourself pushing paper." That dinner had ended with me driving home early, holding back tears, pretending it didn't matter. Now, for the first time, I had something to show him, and fate had perfect timing, because my younger brother, Nathan, was getting married that weekend. A big wedding, full family in attendance, and I had a front row seat. The wedding was set on a hilltop vineyard, 2 hours outside the city. One of those curated rustic places that charge extra for fireflies and flower petals. My brother Nathan and his fiancée had spared no expense. Black tie, catered, drone photography, everything scripted down to the minute. It had been 3 years since I'd seen most of my family, longer since I'd spoken to my father, without feeling like I was on trial. I pulled into the gravel driveway in a rented black coupe, subtle but sharp. I'd chosen my look carefully. Dark green satin gown, minimal jewelry, hair slicked into a clean bun. Not flashy, not loud, just unignorable. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to be seen. The whispers started before I even made it past the welcome cocktails. "Selena, is that her? She looks different." I could feel the curiosity rolling off them in waves. People didn't know where I'd been. They knew I'd left my job, knew I hadn't come home for holidays, knew vaguely that I'd gone quiet. And now here I was, walking through a vineyard full of pastel dresses and gold cufflinks, like I belonged in a different story altogether. My father was holding court near the bar, telling one of his usual, "I closed the deal in 45 minutes," stories to a circle of business friends. He didn't see me right away, but my mother did. She stepped toward me with a practiced smile, the kind she saved for church friends and dental hygienists. "You look lovely," she said. Then, after a pause, "We weren't sure you'd come." "Neither was I said. "You could have at least RSVP'd. "I don't owe anyone paperwork anymore," I said, and let the smile land gently. She gave a polite laugh, like she wasn't sure if I was joking. "Well, your father will be glad to see you. He's been asking." "No," I said. "He hasn't." Her mouth tightened, but she nodded, like she knew I was right. The ceremony started as the sun began to sink behind the hills. Vows, rings, the usual misty-eyed relatives. I sat quietly near the back, letting the beauty of it all roll over me, not out of sentiment, but because I needed the calm before what I was about to do. After the couple kissed and walked back up the aisle, the guests were ushered toward the reception tent. Strung with lights, live music humming in the background, servers balancing trays of Prosecco and duck confit bites. I waited until the speeches started. That's when I approached the table near the dance floor, the one where my father sat, surrounded by other men of consequence. Lawyers, bankers, 2 ex-judges, and a tech CEO I vaguely recognized from a podcast. He saw me coming, straightened his spine, raised one eyebrow, like he couldn't believe I had the gall to interrupt a scene where he was center stage. "Selena," he said, "didn't expect you." I'm full of surprises lately. There was a beat of silence. Someone cleared their throat. One of the men reached for his drink, like he'd suddenly remembered he was thirsty. "I hope you're enjoying yourself," he said, measured. "It's a beautiful day. Nathan's very happy." "It is beautiful," I said, "and I am enjoying myself. In fact, I was just telling someone about my new role." His eyes flickered. "Oh, still at that? Admin position." There it was, the line he'd rehearsed. The bait. I smiled. "No, left that one behind. I'm Director of Global Compliance at Eastridge Capital now." The name landed like thunder. A few of the men shifted. One of them actually muttered, "Impressive." My father's face didn't move, but his jaw locked for half a second. "That's quite a leap," he said. "Didn't realize you were interested in high-level positions." "I always was," I said. "You just didn't notice." Silence. Sharp and clean. Then I added, just loud enough for the whole table to hear, "I left Merrow & Co. 2 weeks before they lost their $300 million credit line. Non-compliance breach. Total financial spiral." The tech CEO blinked. "That was your firm?" "Was," I said. "I was the compliance officer of record. Curtis Daniels fired me without reading my file." And the bank froze them. Someone else murmured. My father's eyes narrowed. He was good at hiding emotion, but not perfect. Especially not when humiliated. Especially not in front of peers. He opened his mouth. Probably to challenge, dismiss, regain footing, but I cut him off. "I didn't come to argue," I said. "Just thought you might want to know your daughter's name was on the front page of Bloomberg this week. Not as a scandal, as a source." Then I turned and walked away before he could gather a reply. Back at the bar, I ordered a bourbon. "Neat." The bartender handed it to me, like I'd just won something. Maybe I had. A few minutes later, my cousin Lila slid up beside me. "Holy shit," she whispered. "That was the coldest thing I've ever seen." "And the best." I didn't reply. I just raised my glass. "Does it feel good?" she asked. I thought about it. The weight of being invisible. The years of being talked over, underestimated, pitied. The nights I'd stayed late fixing systems that someone else would take credit for. And now, here I was, fully seen, untouchable. "It feels quiet," I said. "Like peace," she nodded slowly. "You know he's spiraling right now." "Let him," I said. I lived there for years, but even as I said it, I knew something was still unfinished. Not with my father, not even with Curtis, with me. Because all this time, I'd been surviving on being underestimated, on the small power of proving people wrong, and now I wasn't underestimated anymore. I was visible, powerful, and that meant I had to decide what came next. Not revenge, responsibility. The kind that came with real success, with legacy, and the next move I was planning would change more than just my life. It would change who gets left behind and who gets brought forward with me. The morning after the wedding, I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt clear. For the first time in years, There was no weight on my chest, no impulse to explain myself, no simmering anger, waiting to be validated. I made coffee in the tiny guest house kitchen, barefoot and quiet, watching early sunlight spill over the trees. My phone buzzed with a dozen messages. Old colleagues, distant relatives, even a few reporters asking for comment. I ignored them all because something deeper had started growing inside me. A new restlessness, not the kind born from pain, the kind born from possibility. Power changes you, not the way people think, not into something colder or crueler. Real power doesn't make you ruthless. It makes you deliberate. I opened my laptop, logged into the Eastridge system, and pulled up a few old reports, ones I'd written under someone else's name back at Merrow. I'd kept copies, not for revenge. For accountability, they were brilliant. Not perfect, but precise. Full of frameworks for building compliance teams that didn't just prevent risk. They anticipated it. Systems that could have saved smaller companies from what Morrow suffered, if anyone had read them, but they didn't, because I was just admin. That's when the idea landed. Not fully formed, but sharp enough to sting. What if I built the thing I kept trying to serve? Not a company, a structure, a platform, one that found other Selenas before they burned out or got fired. The quiet ones, the invisible backbones, the women running billion-dollar processes for entry-level pay and no title. I pulled up my contacts. There were hundreds, maybe more, quiet messages from women over the years, thanking me for mentoring, asking for templates, venting about being overlooked. What if I built something for them? A consulting arm under Eastridge, independent, female-led, cross-industry, specializing in compliance turnaround and corporate integrity rebuilding, staffed by women like me, former admins, compliance officers, legal liaisons, ghostwriters of company survival. I pitched the idea that afternoon. The partner at Eastridge paused for maybe 10 seconds, then said, "Build it, just like that." Not a suggestion, a green light. By the end of the week, I had a budget, a project code, and 3 interns ready to onboard. Within a month, I had clients, real ones, companies too small to know what they didn't know, companies trying to grow, but stepping on landmines because no one ever taught them the rules. And behind the curtain, I had a list, women from my past life. Karen, the sharpest mind in documentation I'd ever met. She once flagged a merger clause that saved us $18 in liability and got 0 credit. B, an ex-paralegal who wrote better briefs than the junior lawyers she supported. Let go during a budget reshuffle. Nisha, who'd trained 6 CFOs at her firm and was still stuck at coordinator level when I met her. I called them one by one. "This isn't charity," I said. "You'll earn what you're worth. More, probably. But I need you to lead, to stop hiding behind executives who take the credit." There were tears, silence, laughter. Every call ended with the same word, yes. I called it the Under System, a consulting group disguised as a force multiplier. We didn't advertise. We didn't pitch. We were invitation only. If you needed us, you didn't deserve us. We were the system beneath the system, the women behind the curtains, the architects of stability. And once we started, we didn't stop. Within 6 months, we had 12 clients and 2 buyout offers. Within a year, we were fielding calls from firms that once wouldn't let us in the room. And still, I kept it quiet. I wasn't chasing headlines. I wasn't Curtis. I didn't need a podcast interview or a TED Talk. I needed results, change, and a world where no woman, like me, ever had to sit at a holiday table being told her work didn't matter. Speaking of, which Thanksgiving came fast. I almost didn't go, but something told me I should. Not to prove anything, but to witness something. I wore jeans, brought a pie, and arrived late enough to skip the awkward hugs. My father was in the kitchen carving the turkey, same as always. The table was full. Nathan and his wife were back from their honeymoon, cousins, aunts, background noise. But the air felt different this time. Nobody asked about my job because they already knew. My mother had seen the articles. My cousin had bragged about me at her firm. The silence wasn't ignorance anymore. It was respect, uneasy, but real. 2 years later, I stood outside the glass doors of Marrow & Co. Different sign, different logo, same bones. They'd rebranded after the collapse, got acquired, changed leadership twice, scrubbed the internet clean. You'd barely know they'd once hemorrhaged a 300 million credit line because someone thought I was just admin. But I remembered, and so did the bank that called me last week. They'd invited me to speak at a roundtable on corporate resilience, said it would be historic to hear from the woman at the center of one of the biggest compliance breakdowns in state history, and now the architect of one of its most successful rebuilds. I didn't want to say yes, but I did. Not for revenge, for record keeping. The room was packed. Executives, regulators, journalists, quiet tension hiding behind polite applause. I took my seat at the panel table, microphone in front of me, nameplate 2, not admin, not assistant, Selena Ward, founder, the under system. I waited for the moderator to introduce me. He didn't need to. The room already knew. I looked out at a sea of faces, many curious, some skeptical, a few former bosses, very uncomfortable. I took a breath and I told the story. Not the version they expected, not the soundbite-ready narrative about resilience and girl boss grit. I told the real one, about being overlooked, about sitting in rooms where my notes were stolen, my warnings dismissed, my loyalty used against me, about waking up at 2 a.m. to fix errors that would have cost companies millions, and still being told I was support staff. I spoke about the freeze, the collapse, the silence after I left, the executives who scrambled, the credit line that crumbled, and the headlines they couldn't spin. And then I spoke about what came after, the women who built systems in shadows, who made other people rich and safe and stable while being left off, payroll bonuses and Christmas cards. I told them about Karen, about B, about Nisha and Janelle and dozens of others who were just admin until they weren't. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just documented. By the time I finished, the room was silent. No applause. Not at first. Just a quiet, collective reckoning. Then it came. Not loud, but lasting. Afterward, people approached me. Some to thank me. Some to apologize. Some to ask how to join. But the one that stopped me cold, a young woman, maybe 24, nervous, sharp eyes. She said, "I'm the new compliance coordinator here. They told me to keep things simple, not to overcomplicate reports." She paused, then added, "I brought your case studies into my last meeting." They listened. I smiled. She smiled back. And then she reached into her bag and handed me something, a notebook, plain black, taped at the edges, familiar. "I found it in storage," she said. "Says SW on the inside cover, my old compliance log. The one I kept hidden. The one I wrote in during late nights. The one I thought had been trashed after I left." I opened it. Page after page. Risk flags, system maps, mitigation frameworks. Some dated 5 years before the collapse. I blinked hard. "Closed it. Keep it," I said. "It's yours now." She looked stunned. "Are you sure?" "I don't need to hold the evidence anymore," I said. "You do." She nodded slowly, like it meant more than I knew. And then she walked away. Into the building I once walked out of with nothing but my silence. 3 months later, the Echo Initiative launched in fall. We didn't hit 100 cities. We hit 174. And in every single one, a woman stood at the front of a room and said, "I was once invisible, but not anymore." And they weren't. They were on boards, in policy rooms, teaching MBAs, rewriting codes of conduct, catching fraud before it happened, fixing things before they broke. One day I got a letter, handwritten. It was from Curtis. I didn't read it. I just filed it, under noise, because by then, I'd learned the point wasn't to punish the people who couldn't see your worth. It was to build a world where their opinions didn't matter. And I really had, the last scene, quiet, like all revolutions that last. I was sitting in my garden, no laptop, no calls, just tea. A message came through from Janelle. Just wanted to say, we launched the Detroit office today. Full team, full clients. You were right, they never saw us coming. I smiled, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I just felt free, not because I'd escaped the system, but because I'd replaced it, quietly, permanently, completely. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. "Selena," he said, not looking at me. I read the piece in Forbes, the one about the undersystem. I waited. He glanced up. "It's good work, important." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. "Thank you," I said, a beat. Then Nathan laughed. "Dad used to say you were just playing office. Now she's got CEOs begging for her signature." There was a moment of stillness. Then the table erupted in laughter. Even my father smiled. The tight, reluctant kind that says you win. And that was enough. Not for validation, not for ego, just for peace. Because this wasn't about proving my worth anymore. It was about building a world where women didn't have to. And that work had just begun. Success doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like pressure. Constant, quiet, heavy. People think once you've made it, you can breathe. The truth is, that's when the breathing gets harder. Because now you're not just protecting yourself. You're responsible for others. Every woman I'd brought into the undersystem had placed her future in my hands. Her second chance, her dignity, and every client we took on was a bet. Not just on our ability, but on our ability to stay clean in a dirty game. Because power protects power. And the more success we tasted, the more the old guard noticed. Not all of them liked it. It started with subtle things. We lost a renewal deal with a major energy firm, one I knew we'd over-delivered for. A week later, I saw the CEO posing with a traditional consultancy on LinkedIn. White-haired men in 10K suits, old power, safe power, comfortable ignorance. Then came the emails, vague legal threats, concerns over proprietary methods. Someone even accused us of reverse discrimination. Their actual words. Because we prioritized hiring women who had historically been overlooked. I knew what it was. Pushback. Because we weren't playing the game. We weren't asking for permission. We weren't trying to fit in. We were replacing systems they'd built and exposing just how fragile those systems really were. One night, I got a call from B, now our senior partner. "You need to see something," she said. She shared her screen, an anonymous blog, thousands of views, full of carefully worded exposés about the undersystem, claims we were reckless, that our rise was suspiciously fast, that we had insider help from regulators, nothing illegal, but enough shade to raise eyebrows. I read the whole thing in silence, then closed the tab. "We expected this," I said. "You don't build something disruptive without backlash." "Yeah," B said. "But they're trying to define us before we get big enough to define ourselves." She was right. We were still too young to have legacy, still too new to be seen as inevitable. And so, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called a mentor. She was a retired compliance lawyer I'd once worked under. Her name was Evelyn Shaw. Mid-60s, ruthless, brilliant, and honest to the point of cruelty. I met her at her house in Maine. She lived alone, wore linen like armor, and hated small talk. She poured us whiskey before I even sat down. "Read your little Forbes piece," she said. "Cute." "I didn't write it," I said. "You let them publish it." "Fair." I told her everything. The blog, the pushback, the corporate resistance. She listened, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she leaned back. "You want to know the truth?" "Always." "You're a threat now, Selena. Not because of what you built, but because you built it without asking. They would have loved the undersystem if it was their idea, or if it had failed. But it didn't. You won. So what do? You want the real answer or the safe one?" I smiled. "You've never given the safe one in your life." She finished her drink. "You go louder, louder. You've been playing humble. Quiet power. Very noble. But now it's time for the megaphone. You don't beat old money with whispers. You beat them with impact so loud they can't ignore it. Publish your case studies. Make your clients speak. Get the data. Show the fucking receipts. Won't that make us a bigger target?" "You already are." I flew home with her words burning holes in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I drafted a plan. By noon, B and Karen were in my office. By dinner, the whole leadership team was on board. We would go public. Not IPO, not stock, just visible, transparent, loud. A rolling campaign. Not for money, for power. We'd release one case study a week. With real numbers, real client quotes, real outcomes. A podcast. Stories from women who'd built companies from cubicles. A digital index. Tracking gender equal pay, promotion, and compliance transparency in every firm we worked with. And a pledge for companies to sign if they wanted to be clients. We called it the Visibility Project. By week 3, we had 30,000 subscribers. By week 5, we had our first Fortune 100 client. By week 8, we had a whistleblower case. That one came out of nowhere. A woman named Janelle sent us a message through the secure form. She was a compliance coordinator at a global logistics firm, and she'd uncovered financial misreporting tied to executive bonuses. She'd gone to HR. They'd buried it. She went to legal. They warned her to be careful with unfounded claims. So she came to us. B and Nisha handled it. Quietly, perfectly. They verified the documents, prepped her protections, and lined up outside legal. By the time the firm realized what was happening, we were already negotiating with federal regulators on Janelle's behalf. When the story broke, it exploded. CNN, NYT, everywhere. Not just the scandal, us, the undersystem, the women they called just admin, the force they tried to erase. And suddenly, the world tilted. We weren't fighting for attention anymore. We were the attention. Recruiters flooded us. Startups begged to be clients. Universities asked to partner. But more importantly, other women started building their own platforms, their own systems, their own unapologetic paths. We weren't the only ones anymore. And that's when I knew we'd really won. Because this was never about me. It was about what happens after me. And as I stood on the stage at our first Undersystem Summit, looking out over 500 women from 14 countries, I felt something I hadn't felt even during the fall of Curtis or the freeze of Marrow and Co. I felt freedom. Not the kind you chase, the kind you build. There's a moment after success where everything goes still. Not calm, just quiet. It's the moment you realize you've stopped climbing. And now, you're the mountain. We were there. The Undersystem was no longer niche, no longer doubted, We were in magazines, white papers, boardrooms. Our pledge had been signed by 148 companies. Our podcast had cracked Spotify's top 10. Clients were flying in to meet us. Regulators had started inviting us to roundtables instead of threatening lawsuits. And that's when the offers started coming in. Buyout offers, not partnership, not equity. Full acquisition. Tech firms, legacy consultancies, even a hedge fund disguised as a strategic accelerator. The first number they dangled was $28 million. The second was $44. And then someone offered $70 million cash. We were only 16 months old. My team was split. B, practical as ever, said we had to consider it. Karen said she'd rather burn the thing down than hand it to men invest. Nisha just looked tired. We wouldn't have to fight anymore, she whispered. That hit me harder than anything, because she was right. Running the under system had been the fight of our lives. Every contract, every client, every leak, every whisper campaign. We'd built it inch by inch, not just for ourselves, but for the ones who'd never even seen a C-suite. And now, we had a choice: cash out and watch them reshape us into something safer, blander, more acceptable, or double down and turn this into something that couldn't be bought. I went home that night and didn't speak to anyone. I made tea, sat on my couch, and stared at the ceiling like it held the answer. But the answer was already in my inbox. It was a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Curtis. Subject line: peace? I almost deleted it, but curiosity is a nasty thing. The email was short, smooth, predictable. Hope you're well. Saw the Janelle case. Impressive. I've been doing some advisory work since Marrow. Would love to connect. Maybe collaborate. Collaborate? It was almost funny. He'd built his career on minimizing women like me. And now, here he was, asking to be part of the very system he once said I was too soft to lead. I didn't reply, but I didn't forget it either, because that email told me something important. They weren't just watching us now. They were waiting to see if we'd sell, if we'd buckle, if we'd water ourselves down enough to blend back into their boardrooms. And if we did, they'd win, not publicly, not in headlines, but in the quiet, poisonous way. Power always wins when you're tired. So I called a meeting, just the leadership team. I stood in front of the whiteboard. No slides, no pitch deck. We've got two choices, I said. We can sell, cash out, and let them make us more comfortable. Or we can scale. Scale how? B asked. We train others to build what we built. Karen sat up. Franchise. No, better. License. Not just the brand, the method, the system. We write it down. We standardize it. And we teach it to women who've lived what we lived, so they can build their own undersystems. Exactly. In every sector, every country, every city. Nisha looked stunned. You want to make ourselves replicable. I want to make ourselves unforgettable. Silence. Then one by one, heads nodded. We called it the Echo Initiative. 6-month build-out. Legal, branding, curriculum, platform. Our goal was simple. Train 100 women in 100 cities to start 100 undersystems. Not under our thumb. Under their own. They'd own it. We'd support it. The model would grow like roots, not branches. And when the next Curtis came knocking, asking to collaborate, we wouldn't need to say no, because we'd already be everywhere. But before we could even launch the initiative, the world threw one more test at us. Her name was Eloise Trenholm. A billionaire, old money, corporate royalty, ran a family office with reach into tech, real estate, healthcare. She requested a private meeting. No press, no PR. We met in a penthouse in Manhattan. where the furniture cost more than some countries' GDP. She was cold, polite, brutally intelligent, and she didn't waste time. "You've built something unusual," she said, "and rare things are either acquired, partnered with, or extinguished." I didn't flinch. "We're not for sale. Everything is for sale," she said. "Even principles." I said nothing. She poured wine. "I'm offering you access, my clients, my reach, my platforms. You'll scale faster, globalize instantly, be the face of the next evolution of compliance. And the cost. You follow my model," she said. "We sand the edges, drop the radical language, lose the podcast. No more whistleblower cases. Just growth. Scalable, clean, apolitical. Apolitical." There it was, the code word for erasure. I stood. "We didn't get here by sanding edges. We got here by showing the cracks." She smiled. "You'll burn out." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I won't disappear." As I walked out of that penthouse, I felt no fear, no anger, just clarity. Because I finally understood the final shape of the fight. It wasn't about power. It was about control, and I wasn't here to take control of their system. I was here to replace it.